Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're now going to be talking about the other Game 7 that we saw yesterday take place between the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks, which saw the Pacers pretty handedly do so against the Knicks thanks to an unreal offensive performance. The Pacers put up 130 points to win this game. They had the highest field goal percentage ever at halftime at around 73%. So they were tremendous, and we're going to talk about some of the Knicks part of this equation eventually here, but do want to give credit to the Pacers for stepping up in this moment where we saw them down 3-2 headed into the weekend, and really in large part this big deal that was made right ahead of the trade deadline in acquiring Pascal Siakam. He is maybe a little bit flawed of a star player. We saw Bilal Coulibaly. If you aren't familiar with him, he was a lottery pick for the Washington Wizards this past season, and he went on some sort of podcast and talked about how Pascal Siakam was actually easy to guard. And again, I do think that he is slightly flawed, but at the same time, he was so incredible in these two games, and specifically, I thought it was the hunting mismatches. This is an idea that we talked about during the Milwaukee series as well, where he just sort of imposes his will at times when he has these smaller defenders on him, and with no OG Anunoby, who did briefly at least show up to the game. He started the game for New York, and it was just clear after the first 5 minutes that he was physically not ready to go. And Pascal again got out to a hot start in this game, sort of forced OG to the bench. And again, the Knicks were just kind of throwing Josh Hart as the primary defender on him, and he just did not have the size. The tough shot making of Siakam really is incredible. So scored 25 points on Friday, 20 points yesterday, and what was a total team contribution in this game. All 5 of their starters scored at least 17 points in this game, and again, just seemed like they could not miss. So for Knicks fans, I'm sure you're feeling that a couple things just go differently, especially when you look to Game 3 and the Andrew Nembhard game winner at the end of that one. If that doesn't fall, feels like, are the Pacers going to be the first team to ever come back from a 3-0 deficit? Feels like the case is probably no, but obviously injuries were just a real factor for the Knicks and continued to stack up for them, and it was sort of fully came into picture here when Jalen Brunson suffered the fractured hand injury in the second half that really put an end to the Knicks season there if they were going to have any type of chance to pull off this type of a win. They were going to need him, and the reality of the situation for the Knicks is that teams just aren't necessarily built to be, a sustainable postseason run based off of the back of one scorer. And again, injuries were just a massive part of this whole thing, and it goes far beyond just Jalen Brunson. Like I mentioned, OG Anunoby felt like when he went down with the hamstring injury, that was sort of when the series really started to shift there. That was at the end of Game 2. They end up winning that game, but it just wasn't necessarily the same Knicks defense from there on. Another loss in terms of shot makers helped contribute to them have to go a bunch of different directions with the starting lineups that they were playing with all throughout this series. But Isaiah Hartenstein was dealing with injuries. Mitchell Robinson, he obviously was ruled out. Bogdanovich, you can just go down the list. They were dealt a lot of tough cards, and again, we'll get more into the Knicks conversation in terms of long-term, what this looks like for them in the next segment. But I want to stick a little bit more on the Pacers side of this for now, where inherently a lot of people are going to come for the Pacers, talk about how fortunate they are to be in this position, facing off against a Bucks team that was out without Giannis and Damian Lillard for 2 games, now having this matchup against the New York Knicks. But the reality of the NBA is that injuries are always a part of postseason runs, And for the Pacers, give them credit. They are a deep team. They've been a deep team all season long. That was the number one factor, I thought, coming into this series. And I'm kicking myself a little bit because I had that gut feeling about the Pacers throughout this series, but I was just never able to fully pull the trigger. Maybe in part because I didn't want to, how sensitive Knicks fans can be at times. I didn't want to ruffle too many feathers, maybe. I don't know, but the discrepancy in the benches were a massive part of this, and we just saw when it was that late first quarter, late third quarter, all throughout this series, it was TJ McConnell and Obi Toppin coming in. Isaiah Jackson provided tremendous minutes for the Pacers in this series, and the Knicks just really weren't able to keep up on the other end, where in this game, it was ridiculous performances from TJ McConnell. Ben Shepherd, who has also been a really nice bench piece for the Pacers, he was really feeling himself in this game as well in terms of being a contributor. So a tough one for the Knicks because sometimes, we've talked about it before, the three-point variance of the NBA can absolutely catch up to you at times, but I do think that, on paper, with all the injuries the Knicks were dealing with, the Pacers are the better team in this situation. And I know that it's definitely going to be a conversation of the teams that made the conference finals in NBA history, as far as the worst, maybe undeserving, you could potentially say, teams to reach the conference finals. I just don't feel like the Pacers have been given their credit all throughout this postseason run, where people said they weren't good against Milwaukee, but I just think that I disagree, where Pascal Siakam was incredible early on there. Their bench has been really good for them throughout this whole playoff run. Now, Tyrese Halliburton is a very interesting conversation because he looks to be this superstar player, but, on the road, headed into this game, he was averaging just 10 shot attempts per game, and that's just, you need more from that from your, centerpiece player, but he at least came to play in this game. Now, granted, he didn't have to be the aggressor early on, so I know a lot of people are running with this whole idea of he's a front runner. I don't necessarily see it that way. I think he sets the table for just about everyone in that offense. Now, I would like to see him be a little bit more aggressive in those crunch time situations when the game is a little bit more contested, but at the same time, you take the wins where they come, and Halliburton in this game was the team's leading scorer, so you have to give him credit for that. And again, this Pacers team as a whole, they've just been sort of this team really ever since the in-season tournament, and I know the second half of the season did not go as planned for them, where a lot of the shine with this team sort of wore off, in large part because Tyrese Halliburton was not the same player. After that, was dealing with all of those injuries as well, but even despite that, averaged something like 19 points per game after the All-Star break, so would have preferred to see more from him, but he still, the Pacers are still kicking here, and I think that they, again, like I was talking about earlier in the segment, that what they did to go out and acquire Pascal Siakam, understanding that no, he's not necessarily the perfect NBA player, but understanding their own situation. They are a young team in a mid-market that isn't going to be able to draw the interest of all these free agents, that you go out, you get a borderline all-NBA player, and you just sort of run with it. And here they are now in the conference finals. We're going to be doing more of the series previews tomorrow, so definitely check back in with us there. They have a tall task ahead of them with the Celtics on the other end of this series. Celtics have been able to rest much longer here in the context of a postseason, but at the same time, Pacers have to be feeling good about themselves, and I still think they are going to continue to develop. They hasn't really been talked about because, again, they are a mid-market team, and there have been plenty of other more notable injuries, but losing Benedict Mathurin was a big loss for them at the time, and I still feel like it I don't think that he would be someone that would necessarily swing these series their way when they come into Boston in the conference finals, but a very valuable player for them that they've been able to hang in there without. And it's almost opened the doors a little bit for having some of these other bench players step in and play meaningful minutes for them. Aaron Nesmith may be feeling like there's no pressure behind him in order to, fully succeed. And also in terms of making these midseason deals, was moving on from Buddy Hield, where they just clearly didn't see eye to eye in terms of what his role should be versus from their perspective versus what he wanted. And again, this is a situation where Shepherd was able to sort of thrive being their sharpshooter off the bench instead, and the future is still very bright for the Pacers. So we'll talk more about what the rest of the playoffs look like for them tomorrow, but for now, I do want to sort of put a little bit of a bow on both the Nuggets and the Knicks, who were eliminated. So stick with us, and we will look ahead to their offseason right after this quick break. So stick with us. We will be right back.